Okay, let's begin with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we give thanks we can meet via Zoom. We give thanks for the light that you've been shedding abroad our path concerning chronology and the repeat of Millerite history, and just information concerning time and dates and so forth, as the Millerites had to also deal with these things as well. And I pray that they can contribute to the message to the world and to others in the Seventh-day Adventist Church of the truthfulness of your leading in this here message, in this here movement, and that we can bring this here message to the others in the church and to the world. We ask for your Holy Spirit. We ask for vessels to be clean inside, purified, and we ask that those who watch in video later may be blessed by this study as well. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Excuse me. Okay, so we left off just in the year 1493 BC. So this was the crossing of the River Jordan. And we were dealing with the ceasing of the manna. And according to my calculations and all the information that we can get online, that the manna ceased on the Friday morning. That would have been the 14th day of the first month. So that would have been the Passover. Would have had manna for 2 days on that particular day. And then I did some calculations. So if I wasn't sure whether they were on this when we finished, but I already had them on this here before the end of the last presentation. So we have the words, then on the Sabbath, being the morrow after the Passover, they did eat of the old corn of the land, unleavened cakes and parched corn. So that would have been the feast of unleavened bread. So the manna wouldn't have ceased then. So the next day they would have been expecting the manna to fall. It says, then on the morrow, after they had eaten of the old corn of the land, making this Sunday the 5th of May, being the 16th day of the first month, the manna ceased. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So they may have been expecting the normal manna to be falling on that particular Sunday, but then it ceased. So we have seen that the manna initially fell on the 16th day, nearly 40 years prior, being on the second month. The total time over which the manna fell was 14,587 days. That's inclusive reckoning. So including the last Sabbath day, that's and this was 2,084 weeks. So there was 2,084 Sabbaths when the manna did not fall, and then 2,084 preparation days when a double portion was collected, and then 10,420 days when the manna fell, needing to be ate on that particular day. So I just have the demonstrate right out there. with the Passover, double portion. And then the 15th day, they're eating off the old corn of the land, unleavened cakes and parched corn. But I presume that they would have had the manna from the previous day as well, potentially.
Mhm.
And then the Sunday, then the manna ceases to fall. This is something I found on the internet, that if you add up the ages of the patriarchs from Adam to Moses,
Okay.
going through the line of Levi, it comes to 1260 plus times 10, so you get 12,600.
Just one thing that comes to mind. Somebody made a mention about the generations, because we talked about the 4 generations. So we know when it comes to the 4 generations, when they come out in the 4th generation, that the generation that's marked there is through the line of Levi, right? As you're noting there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because Kohath, Amram, and Levi are the only ones that they give the ages of how long they lived in those generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't have the ages of anyone else. Now, when it comes to the 4 generations, there's also 4 generations to when they go down into Egypt, as we've seen, right? So we're going Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph marks the 4th generation because he enters into Egypt first. And then there's 4 generations where they come out. So I just wanted to note that there's these 4 generations in the first 1215 years and the 4 generations in the next 1250 years, or 1250, 215 years, these 2 periods of 215 years, each have 4 generations, but they're not the same line. But we don't get, the years in Joseph's line, because we're going to be following Moses' line. But the question is why? Why would we be following Moses' line and not Judah's line if we're following the line of Christ? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Well, Joseph has the double portion, and
Okay, so Joseph has the double portion. Moses is the line of Levi, that's the priesthood. And then we have the other line, which is the seed of Christ, which is kept track of, but just not chronologically in that period, other than its relationship to the other lines.
Joseph, he typifies Christ.
What's that? And he typifies Christ, yeah. But still, Christ is going to come from Judah, from the line of Judah, not from the line of Levi or the line of Joseph. Yet, all of these 3 lines are dealt with in some way, but just differently. So, somebody was suggesting that we need to look at the line of Joseph, but the fact that Moses' line is the one that gives us the symbol of 1216, 10 times 1260, I think is significant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have done a wee bit more research. So this is just gives you the age when the patriarchs, when their son is born. So obviously this is Seth. So Cain and Abel were born before that, so we don't have their ages. And then we know that these are the ages they lived to.
Yeah.
And then the differences.
Yeah.
So Seth lived 18 years less than his father. Enos 7 years less. Cainan lives 5 years more, and so forth. And then we have the years lived after the birth of the son.
Okay.
And then the years lived after his father died or was taken by God. the case of Enoch.
Yeah.
So I think I said incorrectly that Haran was one of the first person, I think, or who died before his father, which was incorrect. So
Okay.
there was actually 4 others who died before their father, before Haran.
Okay.
So we have here, for instance, the age Joseph lived to. He lived 37 years less than his father. He lived 56 years after his father died. Or sorry, is this where he was 56 when his father died,
Yeah.
and then he lived 54 years after after his father when his father died. So that's how it works out. But nothing really particularly stands out. Yeah, the numbers or that type of thing, but it's just
Okay.
their information.
Yeah, so people can reference the chart if they want,
Yes.
if they're curious about some of them.
And then I calculated that as of 2022, it's Enoch is 5,445 years old. We don't have, so this is basically as far as being going in the line of the ages
Mm-hmm.
of the fathers and sons. Obviously now, for instance, I don't mention Japheth because we don't know how long he lived,
Right.
but we know how long Hashem lived and so forth. So it's just, it's not always just the firstborn son.
Yeah. Well, it's the
And
line
then,
that we're following,
yeah.
line of Christ.
So it comes down to Joseph. We know he had Ephraim and Manasseh in the 7 years of plenty, but we can't tell exactly how old Joseph was. We know it would be between 30 and 37. And then, so he lived after the birth of his sons between 73 and 80 years.
Okay.
So basically, that's me finished there.
Yeah. So, okay. So just another point again here. So, we're following the line of Christ, but here when we get to Joseph, we're not following Judah because we don't know how long Judah lived.
Yes.
Joseph and Levi, we have their ages of when they died, not Judah.
Mhm.
Now, the 22 generations then would end with Jacob. So Joseph would
Yes.
be the 23rd. And
Yes.
the brothers would all be the 23rd generation. Okay.
Okay. So go on to the next, that would be Judges. Okay, so I don't know if we want to cover this again.
Well, the whole study on the judges, I don't know. You could maybe give some highlights because we did do
Mhm.
this section on the judges, but
Yes.
because
So
what's the main gist of the judges? Because there are some periods of like the 300 years and different things like that we should go over.
yeah,
And
actually, well, I forgot to do. It's actually Joshua.
Joshua first.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay. So, yeah, you got to do Joshua. Yeah.
there's not much in Joshua, but okay.
There we go.
So after the crossing of the Jordan, in the spring of 1493 BC, the children of Israel proceeded to defeat 7 nations in the land of Canaan before the Lord divided their land to them by lot. From Joshua 14:5 to 10, it can be ascertained that this took 6 years. So we have here the story of Caleb, and he's going to ask, maybe you can just read it for me. Just
Okay, you want me to read it?
yes, please.
Okay, as the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did, and they divided the land. Then the children of Judah came unto Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said unto him, Thou knowest the thing that the Lord said unto Moses, the man of God, concerning me and thee in Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to espy out the land. And I brought him word again, as it was in mine heart. Nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt. But I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses sware on that day, saying, Surely the land whereon thy feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance, and thy children's forever, because thou hast wholly followed the Lord my God. And now behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, since the Lord spake this word unto Moses, while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, lo, I am this day 85 years old. So it's 45 years later. The year
Yes.
the year that Caleb began to spy the land of Canaan was about a year and 3 months since they had left Egypt. Caleb states that he was 40 years old at that time. Therefore, he would have been at the most 39 years old during the time of the Exodus. In the above verses, he states that 45 years had passed since he spied Canaan, making him then, as he states, 85 years old, therefore being 46 years older than he was during the Exodus. So you got the chart here. Just explain it a bit more.
Yeah, so it talks about there, as the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did, and they divided the land.
Yeah.
So we have here Caleb age 85 at this year time,
Yeah.
and he says he is 45. He says he was 40 when he spied out the land, so that's when it was 45 years prior. So you can work out that it was about a year and 3 months roughly from that spying out of the land from the Exodus of 1533.
So we have
these
a period of 46 years there.
We do, yes. So I mentioned this here coming up. So these 46 years can be seen to mirror 46 days,
You mean
followed by the
40
days. Sorry. The six days followed by the 40 days that Moses stayed up on Mount Sinai before receiving the 10 Commandments on the 2 tables of stone. So we have that where that's mentioned in Exodus, that cloud covered it 6 days. Then the 7th day, Moses called Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and he was there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Now, how long does Ellen White
have this here?
That period is that 6 days? Because she mentions it too.
Yes, she mentions that he's there 6 days, and then he's called into the cloud on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And then he's there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have that there in 1533 BC. You have 6 days and then 40 days. And then we have 40 years and then 6 years from the land being divided, or the land rest from war. So this just, the following verses then, Caleb says to Joshua, now therefore give me this mountain, whereof the Lord spake in that day, for thou heardest in that day how the Anakims were there, and that the cities were great and fenced. If so be the Lord will be with me, then I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him, and gave Caleb the son of Jephunneh Hebron for an inheritance. Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the
Jephunneh. It's
Kenizzite.
pronounced Jephunneh.
Jephunneh, okay, thanks. Unto this day, because that he had wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. Thereafter the land had rest from war, and in the following chapters the land begins to be divided by lot. So I'm kind of taking it, he's not too long in taking Hebron, a matter of a few days. I'm not foreseeing any like major year-long siege. So the time span of the book of Joshua, in Patriarchs and Prophets, we read, before the distribution of the land had been entered upon, Caleb, accompanied by the heads of his tribe, came forward with a special claim. Except Joshua, Caleb was now the oldest man in Israel.
Mhm.
So this quote occurs in the context of Caleb being 85 years old. Joshua was the only Israelite older than Caleb, and therefore had to be at least 86 years old. Now, it could be about 85 and a half or something, but I'm just saying, I'm taking these 86, maybe at the youngest. So Joshua was 110 years old when he died. Therefore, at the most, he led Israel 24 years after this time, and 30 years from replacing Moses as God's chosen leader. Potentially then being 80 years old, the same age as Moses when he had led the children of Israel through the Red Sea. This would place the history of the book of Joshua from 1493 BC to 1463 BC at its greatest extent.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of him being 86 years old, because that would then mean he's crossing the Jordan, the sea, the rivers being divided when he's the same age as Moses, when the Red Sea was divided for him.
Okay.
And so, but you can only speculate. That's just what would be my best guess. So I've added here some information that we get from the Talmud that accounts for 40 years of the wandering of the wilderness, and then 7 years taken to conquer the land of Canaan, and 7 years to divide the land among the tribes, putting the first Jubilee cycle precisely 54 years after the Exodus. So that's Wikipedia on the Jubilee. That's from where I get it from.
Okay. Now I've looked at that before, and I remember it differently. That there's 7 years to divide till they divide the land, and another 7 years till they have rest from their enemies. But that's what Wikipedia says the 2 periods of 7 years are.
Well, they're quoting from the Talmud.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah, but so the dividing of the land. So they're saying 7 years to conquer the land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they're going to start dividing the land at the end of that 7 years.
Yes.
And then there's going to be 7 years in which they finally divide the land. So it takes 7 years in the dividing of it. And then they have rest from their enemies at the end of that. That must be what it is. I don't know. But anyway, there's 2 periods of 7 years. So
Yes, and you had connected this. This was like 252 years from the death of Jacob, and you had noted this here,
mhm.
in like the seven periods of 252 years.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there would be three periods then from here till 723 BC.
Yeah.
So this year period could be divided into two periods of 54 years with 144 years in the middle, if this year Talmud was correct. But
Yeah.
and
We have no
then
way of proving that. We have no way of proving it, but
no,
they have a reason why we calculated it that way. It also gives us two more periods of 7 years that connect us to the story of Joseph and to the story of Jacob with Leah and Rachel.
and if you combine the two periods of 54 years, you'd have 108 years plus 144.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of reminded me of the way
Mm-hmm.
the fathoms
Mm-hmm.
were working out in inches that we find in Acts 27, verse 28. We have 15 fathoms and 20 fathoms being mentioned. And there's 72 inches in a fathom. So that works out to be 1,080 inches and then 144. Oh, sorry, 1,440 inches then.
Yeah.
So
Which gives us 20 inches.
that's correct, yes.
And this is 252 years, so that's why it's one.
And so I'm marking a 1487 BC is where I'm marking the 6 years after the crossing of the Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the tabernacle being set up then in that year as well as the land being divided by lot. As I say, we're not too sure how long the land takes to be divided. Then it mentions there the land had rest after these 6 years.
Okay.
So let's move on to Judges.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, that's a pretty interesting piece of the puzzle there, the 252 years. And remember, it was in 2016 when I was counting the 7 periods of 252, that's 17,064 years, or 1,764 years. And you suggested counting backwards from 34 AD. So there's 1,764 years from 34 AD to 1798. And then when we counted backwards, we came to the date that I had for Jacob's death.
Yes.
And so that's 7 periods of 252 years, divided as 2 or as 3, 3, and 1. Because 756 years backwards from 34 AD to 723, and then another 756 years from 723 to 1469.
Yeah, should maybe add them, do my own diagrams and add these to this. I haven't added that sort of observation.
Yeah, we should put that in there. Okay.
So we're moving on now to the Judges. And this deals with the 450 years of Acts 13, verse 20. So people think that this year period is referring to the Judges. When you read it in the King James, it says, "And after that he gave unto them judges about the space of 450 years until Samuel the prophet." While some modern translations, the New International, says, "All this took about 450 years. After this, God gave them judges until Samuel the prophet." So it has a different sort of.
Well, it's the sentence order. So the thing
Yes.
that's interesting is the King James translators translated the Greek correctly, except that the translator failed to order the verses, because in Greek, English, sentence order matters, but that's not the case in Greek. And so when you actually look at the Greek, you can see that the 450 years precedes the time of the judges. But because he just translated it literally, he left the Greek sentence order, and that makes it less clear. So it's just a matter of placing some commas in or rearranging the sentence that you see that the 450 years is not the period of the judges. It's another period.
So these 450 years go from the choosing of the fathers until he divided the land to them by lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mentioned there that would cause problems with 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, where you have 480 years being mentioned. But out of that 480 years, you have 84 years of the kings of David and Saul and Solomon. So that would make it 396 years. So it would really fit these here 450. So the choosing of the fathers, I'm using Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 7 as a proof text. The choosing of the fathers, which marks the beginning of this 450-year period, relates to Abraham or Abram being called out of Ur. It says, "Thou art the Lord God, who didst choose Abram and brought him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees and gave him the name of Abraham." So using that as what the Acts is saying, the choosing of the fathers. So we maybe see this as about 5 years before he left Haran. I have here speculated, but I think there's other. Yeah, so actually I added that into I didn't have that in my previous. The first one we looked at about the time we left, about the time period of Abraham and so forth. So I've added that there into the table, that when Abraham or Abram was 70 when he left Canaan, or Ur, sorry. When he left Ur, he was 70. So I've added that into the diagram. I didn't have that in before.
Mm. Okay.
So I just have there, what's the correct way of seeing it? Israel came out of the land of Egypt. So this is 1 Kings 6. Then you have the 4th year of Solomon, and the temple construction begun. And that's you can see the judges there being about 396 years. And that would be a wrong way to say the dividing of the land by lot. God gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. But this is the right way, choosing of the fathers, about the space of 450 years. The dividing of the land by lot, God gave them judges until Samuel the prophet.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing interesting about in Millerite understanding, because William Miller is trying to get the 6,000 years to end in 1843, so he inflates the years of the judges to try to get this number, but he just completely rejects 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1 as being in error, and that was the one thing I couldn't do, is accept that a Bible verse is in error. So once I looked at the Greek of Acts chapter 13 verse 20, it was pretty clear that the error was just a reading of the verse in Acts, not some typo in 1 Kings chapter 6.
About this year's space of 450 years, I reckon it's going to be not far off 480 from when Abraham left Ur to the dividing of the land by lot.
Yeah, well, some people put it to the birth of Isaac or to the weaning of Isaac or things like that. So they just,
That would be near. Yes, that would be near 450.
yeah, that's where I had placed it. It was to the weaning of Isaac. It's just a continuation of that 400 years where he's just, roughly adding that in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's where you want to place the choosing of the fathers.
Mm-hmm.
So the time of the judges, this is the most vague chronological period presented in the Bible. When it comes to placing the period of when a judge began and ended their period of judging, we can, on the most part, only speculate with approximate dates. We have, though, been given 2 300-year spans from which we can place some of the judges. So there's one period from 300 years from Israel dwelling in Heshbon and Aor. How you spell that? Pronounce that?
Aurora.
Aurora. Okay, so we find this in Judges 11:26. It states the words of Jephthah and a message to the king of Ammon near the end of 18 years of Philistine and Ammonite oppression. While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and her towns, and in Aroer and her towns, and in all the cities that be along by the coast of Arnon, 300 years, why therefore did you not recover them within that time? So Israel began to dwell in Heshbon after they defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites. This was likely in late 1494 BC and several months before the conquest of Canaan, beginning in the spring of 1493 BC. Numbers 21:31 tells us that this was when Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. So they're going to conquer the Amorites, and then they're going to conquer Og, the king of Bashan, and then they're going to go to Baal Peor, and then you're going to have Balaam having to come from Mesopotamia all the way to Moab, and then that's going to take several months as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have that Baal Peor incident, and then you're going to have the Sermon of Deuteronomy, Moses dying, and then after that there, then you have Joshua, then they cross the Jordan, then 10th day of that first month. And then we have 300 years from the ark at Shiloh. Ellen White says the ark remained at Shiloh for 300 years until, because of the sins of Eli's house, it fell into the hands of the Philistines, and Shiloh was ruined. The ark was never returned to the tabernacle here. The sanctuary service was finally transferred to the temple at Jerusalem, and Shiloh fell into insignificance. Taking these 300 years as exact, they would begin and end about 7 years after the 300 years of Judges 11:26. This would make Eli contemporary with Jephthah. So crossing of the Jordan is about a year, well, less than just several months after the dwelling in Heshbon. And we can also mark then Eli when he was born, when he began to judge. And then he dies when he's 98, and then the ark is removed. So that's the period of 300 years. So it would be the case that there are unspecified periods where the judges overlap in their ruling. it is likely that some of the judges only judge for a specific locality of Israel. The account of Judges renders that Jephthah chiefly subdued Ammon from the areas of Israel east of the Jordan, namely Gilead and Manasseh. There's no account of him subduing the Philistines, who were also said to be oppressing Israel with Ammon for 18 years. And then we have the 20 years of Samson as a judge. So another example of an overlap of the years given in the book of Judges it can be understood that the 20 years of Samson, when he judged, was a portion within the 40 years of the Philistine oppression. So we have here in Judges 13, verse 1, it says, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And we are told that Samson judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Mm-hmm. And Elamite speaking of Samson states that in the early years of the Philistine oppression, a child was born through whom God designed to humble the power of these mighty folks." So this would have been maybe like a year or two into this here 40 years. And then he's going to marry. Says here, just as he is entering upon manhood, Samson connected himself with the enemies of Israel. And then talks about this here wife he is going to enter into a marriage with. But I think they ended up burning her. And then out of that, he then destroys their fields. And then the Israelites deliver him into the hands of the Philistines, and he grabs the jawbone of the ass and kills him. And then it says after that victory, the Israelites made Samson judge, and he ruled 20 years. So if you have to sort of gauge if he's born early in that Philistine period, and then it meant as he is entering in the manhood, I'm thinking he's going to be maybe about 18 years old, 20 maybe. And then he's going to be, he has that battle, and then he judges for 20 years. So you can see clearly that them 20 years are going to take him towards the end of that 40-year Philistine oppression.
Yeah, you definitely just can't take all the periods of years mentioned in the book of Judges and add them up.
Well, you can do it, but it's not going to be reflected in reality.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, so you can add them, but yeah, it's not going to reflect reality. So it is a rather complicated period. I've never been able to work it out exactly. I've looked at other people's charts, but
Well, I actually have added up the years of the judges that you find, the dates that they give. And it does come to a period of 390 years. 350 years up until the Philistines, and then you have a 40-year period with Samson here. And this kind of matches what we find in Ezekiel, the same period that he kind of puts for the kings.
Yeah.
You have a 350-year period for, well, it's a 390-year period, and then a 40-year period for Judah, 390 for Israel, and 40 for Judah.
Yeah, so in this, so one of the things about the period of the judges is Joshua is not the period of the judges. He's excluded from that number, correct?
Yes.
So that's always a problem that people have. Often they're uncertain about where they're going to start the period. And then to say when the period of the judges ends, where would we end it? Because if you say until Samuel the prophet, when does Samuel occur before Saul? Or are you going to, you understand what I'm asking?
So I have Joshua here, and then it talks about the elders who outlived Joshua.
Yeah.
And then we have that a period of 350 there, and then 40.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then you have Eli, and then you have Samuel. So it's
Yeah.
so we're looking this to fit into a period of 396 years from when they crossed the River Jordan.
Yeah. So it's too long a period if you do it this way.
Yes. And then if you take First Kings to be beginning when they have the Exodus,
Yeah.
it would be 356 years. It'd be even shorter.
Yeah.
So it would be more of an issue, just more of an overlap happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I have that illustrated.
because we start the 480 years when they've fully come out of the land of Egypt when they crossed the Jordan. And that was one of the things we struggled with, at least I did, in doing that, to depart from Usher in such a radical way. But there was other things in the spirit of prophecy that showed that was correct.
Yeah, so I have that 356 years would be the time period of the judges if you're going to have these 480 years beginning at the Exodus. Well, if you put the crossing of the Jordan, it gives you 396.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the consequence of fitting in the generations of Matthew chapter 1, verses 5 to 6 into the period of the judges. So if you read Matthew, it says, and Salmon begat Boaz, or Booz, of Rechab. Booz begat Obed of Ruth. Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. So Salmon married Rahab, who had hid the spies in Jericho at the beginning of the 396-year period from the crossing of the Jordan to the anointing of Saul. Unto the birth of David, this period would become 406 years. In this period, we are given but 5 generations from Solomon to David. It would imply that Boaz, Obed, and Jesse would each have to have, on average, about 125 to be an average of 125 years old when they became fathers of the sons identified in their lineage. And well, it's kind of quite an old age to be fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rahab, I have an estimate, she's a prostitute in Jericho at the time of the walls falling in 1493. So I've given her age about 20. So she's going to have Boaz, she's going to marry Salmon and have Boaz as her son. So I'm making her about 50 years old to still be childbearing. I don't know, how old is childbearing? Is that possible?
Well, it's possible. It's not likely, but it can happen.
Yeah, so I've extended it basically as far as I could maybe reasonably estimate, just to sort of try to fit this in. And then Boaz is going to be 130 years old then when he marries Ruth, or just actually not before he marries Ruth, and then he's going to be 130 years old when he begets Obed.
Okay.
This is like estimates, just to roughly, if they're all going to fit. And then Obed's going to be 130 years old when he begets Jesse. And then Jesse is going to be 116 years old when he begets David. And so he actually lived. He's still living when David slays Goliath. So we don't know how old David is when he does slay Goliath, but I think he's going to be maybe about 17 or so. So he's going to be over 130 years old then, roughly, when David was doing that, if this kind of working out. Do you have some idea of that Jesse is old? So 1 Samuel 17 verse 12 emphasizes his old age. Jesse had 8 sons, the man who went among men, for an old man in the days of Saul. He is still mentioned, okay, so I've mentioned that he's alive there when he slays Goliath. So Samuel does say, book of Samuel says he is an old man in the days of Saul. So I'd say about 120 or so, maybe anyway. So I have here, this is like the tables, so I'm able to make just the years when Eli was born, when he began to judge, and then when Jephthah judges. You can maybe put in the 18 years here, or something I could maybe add of Philistine and Ammon oppression. That's something we could be sure of. That's something I do. And then we have the ark being removed in 1187 BC. And then so Eli dies, and then we have Ibzan would be judging as well at the same time of Eli. And we have Samuel invested as a judge 20 years after Shiloh. The ark's removed from Shiloh. We get that in 2 Samuel 7 verse 2. And verse 17 just talks about Samuel living he judges all the days of his life. So I'm thinking Samuel, if he's going to live until the reign of David, he himself is going to be about 130 or so years old when he dies. If this here, if he's going to be, maybe I'm putting him about like a teenager when Eli dies, so he's going to be about 130 years old then when he dies in the time of David. Well, in the time of Saul ruling, but David's about, anoints David and dies several years after that. So that's the period of the judges covered. If there's any questions, move on.
Okay, so I mean, there's nothing else other than that information that we have to go on. Nothing in the spirit of prophecy that helps us in that.
That's all I find, yes.
Okay. Now, I know some people try to say there's just missing generations in the account in Matthew.
Yes. So what do you think about this here? Because I would kind of favor a less period for the judges, I think.
Less than what we have, you mean?
Well,
What the Bible gives us?
no, if you had this year to go by and not, I know we have more credible evidence from 1 Kings 6 and the other things, so there is, but this, how do you find this here? It's kind of,
Well, I don't know. I don't speculate. I just take what the Bible gives us, and I try not to argue with it. I mean, it's definitely possible. I mean, and we see this a lot in the line of Christ, where people are much later in their years before I mean, why would, Jacob, for instance, wait until he's 84 years old to be married? Things like that. So,
yes.
yeah. So I take what the Bible gives us. To me, to speculate beyond that is not wise. Okay, you kind of. Stephen's a little bit stopped, paused. Okay. So Stephen is kind of paused there for a moment. Anybody have any questions about what we've seen so far in this study? Is anybody there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I mean,
Yeah,
there's,
we're here. I'm just pondering everything. I need to look at these tables.
I need to watch
I need
it.
to
Watch
look
it
at them
again.
quietly on my own.
yeah.
You watch it again. I need to watch it again before.
Yeah. Now, some of these things, like dealing with the 480 years that's mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1. So as I said, Usher just, or not Usher, Miller just kind of rejects it. He just says it's incorrect. He's going to take what it says in Acts 13:20. And, so just in the context of what Stephen's talking about, we have something that seems unlikely or improbable. We have the information in the Bible. And so often what we will do is we will try to fill in the missing pieces with our speculation. And I find that that's not the best thing to do. And especially if we're going to
That's where people go wrong.
yeah, if we say that the Bible must be wrong or this must be a typo or something like that,
It's not good.
yeah, that's where I would have the problems. So that's something that I've always tried to avoid in any of the things that I've done. I don't like speculating because I could miss out on something that's there. And I definitely don't try to correct the Bible to fit my understanding.
Well, God will show us sooner or later.
Yeah.
So we don't have to speculate, really.
Yeah. I mean, it is possible that Matthew is just choosing the numbers symbolically, and that maybe there's more people in those generations, but we're not given who they are. And so, I just sort of accept that's what the Bible's given us. There's no point trying to add to the Bible.
You have another witness in Ruth as well. It gives you the same lineage.
Yeah, exactly. Now, but the point is in Matthew, it's talking about how many generations. It's giving us that this is a number of generations. Where there, I mean, a person could be a descendant, but I think that Matthew's probably correct.
In the lineage of Matthew with the Christ line going from Abraham to Christ, it does skip out some generations as well.
Yeah.
So it is possible.
Well, it is possible, and it's possible that lots of things are possible, but I'm not going to say which is the correct one. There's other possibilities, but people make a big deal about it, about contradictions in the Bible and so forth. And to me, it's just not really an issue in something like this. We just kind of accept what it says. Our understanding is limited, so there's no point trying to resolve it in some definitive way. But we can see that it is possible.
Okay, so I have here when Saul is anointed,
Mhm.
Ishbosheth, he's also born at the same time. We don't know how old Saul was. We know how long he reigned. And we have a statement from Ellen White here concerning the second year. This is the second year of Saul. Jonathan initiates a defeat of the Philistines at Gibeah. And then Saul makes a presumptuous sacrifice. And I'll just read the Ellen White quote here. It was not until the second year of Saul's reign that an attempt was made to subdue the Philistines. The first blow was struck by Jonathan, the king's son, who attacked and overcame the garrison at Gibeah. Then we have the story of, I think he eats honey or something, and Saul wants to kill him. What happens then? And then, so that's the second year. And then Saul, I have here, Saul commanded to destroy Amalek. So this would be in his fourth year. And disobeys the Lord by not destroying all that was commanded. So it's 400 years from entering of Canaan. So I'm taking this from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 627. And this is, we use this for evidence for 1533 BC. So could you read that for me, please?
Yeah. Evidence for 1533 BC being the date of the Exodus. The 400 years of Patriarchs and Prophets, page 627, paragraph 3. The Lord sent his servant Samuel with another message to Saul. The prophet said, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way, when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." The Amalekites had been the first to make war upon Israel in the wilderness, and for this sin, together with their defiance of God and their debasing idolatry, the Lord, through Moses, had pronounced sentence upon them. By divine direction, the history of their cruelty toward Israel had been recorded with the command, "Thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it." Deuteronomy 25:19. For 400 years, the execution of the sentence had been deferred, but the Amalekites had not turned from their sins. The Lord knew that this wicked people would, if it were possible, blot out his people and his worship from the earth. Now the time had come for the sentence, so long delayed, to be executed. Do you want me to read still?
Yes, please.
Okay, this passage from Patriarchs and Prophets relates to the events of 1 Samuel chapter 15. It references the command found in Deuteronomy, which was given by Moses just before his death and the Israelite crossing of the river Jordan. If the Exodus occurred in 1493 BC, these 400 years would begin in 1453 BC, after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and end in 1053 BC. This date equates to the fourth year of King David rather than of Saul. However, a 1533 BC date for the Exodus would have the 400 years end in the fourth year of Saul, which would be a more valid year for the events of 1 Samuel chapter 15. So that was one of the pieces of the puzzle that convinced me of the 480 years.
Yes, so
Ending so that we have 1533.
you can see that we go to early in David's reign rather than Saul's. So we can see that Saul was born about 10 years into Saul's reign. And then Mephibosheth, about 25 years later after David. And then David begins to reign. He's 30. So that's when Saul dies, also in that year. So David reigns from Hebron.
Mhm.
And then Ishbosheth reign ends, I think we've got 2 years later. I'm not too sure exactly when he dies. I think could be that time, but I've kind of refrained from being dogmatic on that there. And then he reigns from Jerusalem then when he's 37. And you can work out that Solomon was born when he was 52. So that was when he was 18,720 prophetic days old,
Mhm.
roughly, as a symbol. And then Rehoboam was born when Solomon was 17. And then David dies. Solomon begins to reign just before David dies. So he's 18 and as David, his father, would be 70. You have a symbol there of 187, just when Solomon begins to reign as well. Shimei breaks his oath and is killed. That's about 3 years into Solomon's reign. And then the temple construction begins. That's the 480 years ends then. And then it's completed after 7.5 years or so. And then Solomon's house is completed after 13 years after he begins to reign.
Mhm.
Or actually, no, sorry, after 13 years after he builds the house, or the temple construction and the house. I've had it began the same time. I have. So, and then Hiram is given 20 cities. I'm not too sure exactly. It's either when Solomon is 38 or 42. And then Solomon dies when he's 58. So we can now bring in a sort of date span correlation. So the first time prophecy given by Noah, or when Noah begins to build the ark and to prophesy concerning the flood, the judgment, 120 years, and then it's 977 years to the Exodus. But from that position of beginning to build the ark, it's 1533 years to 977 BC. We have here the time period when Jeroboam sets up 2 golden calves. And then at the end of 977 years in 1533, we have Aaron setting up the golden calf.
Mhm.
And we have a 120-year period beginning this time, and a 120-year period we can identify of the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon, also ending this year period. So this is something that was found out after, once you have 1533 BC as the date of the Exodus, these here date span correlations can then be found. And to me, it's like a confirming of the chronology that we have when we see these type of things.
Yeah, and now this shows up in lots of other things as well with the chronology. That we
What's
have
the-
these
Yes,
spans of time showing up as years.
Hey, what's the time?
Yes.
What's the time between the death of Moses and Saul's begins reign?
Yeah, because you have that center, you just don't have that one marked the number of years.
What is that?
Yes.
How many years is that?
I'll have to get my calculator.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah,
All right.
you just would take 1493 minus 1097. So you just would
Yeah,
add,
396. That's the time period of the judges.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay, yeah,
So
Yeah.
we dealt with that number.
yeah, right.
You also have a correlation then with these 40 years after the Exodus, and you have 40 years then before the golden calves and 40 years afterwards.
Mhm.
And that's 1017 then till the death of Moses in 1493. And then it's going to be 1493 years to when Solomon begins to reign, and that's in 1017 BC. So again, another date and span correlation.
Now, the basic mathematical thing behind that date and span correlation just has to do with the length of time that we have BC related to these events, right? So if we didn't have 1533, we wouldn't have such a correlation. Correct?
You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it would always be true then if you're going to take, and that's because the number of years BC is, that is, if you add the year and the span of time from 2510 BC. So that's the place where we're working, 2510 BC. So if you add those together, they will always add up to 2510 BC. So it's the placing of 2510 BC that actually creates this coincidence. Correct?
God incidents.
Okay, God incidence, yes. Well, I'm using coincidence in the old classical sense. It's just a coincidence, things that occur in relationship to each other. So
Yes.
what is it about the number 510 BC? What is the relationship mathematically that creates this structure? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Oh yeah, if you just add 1533 plus 977, you get 2510.
Yeah,
Is that what you're? No, you're
yeah,
saying something else.
yeah. Okay. Now, and the creation of the world, does this have anything to do with the creation of the world being in 46 BC? That's what I'm asking. Right. I mean, I understand we can put these together, but
Mhm.
there's a mathematical reason why 510 does this, because we have these dates BC. So the dates BC, in a sense, if we have these spans of time and we didn't have these dates BC, they wouldn't really mean anything. You understand what I'm saying?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So
You'd have these spans, but the dates wouldn't really match.
right. Okay. So, so somebody can kind of look at it. It's kind of almost like it's just once we create these dates, once we create the chronology, it creates this coincidence of time. And and it's going to happen anytime you do it. It's all going to add up to 510 BC. But the question is, why 510 BC? 2510 BC, I mean. What is it about 2510 BC that causes this to occur?
This is the first time prophecy.
Okay. And so if we had it at some other year, it wouldn't work out. Right? We
Yes.
couldn't just take any year and do this.
Mhm.
But the span of time is going to match the years BC. Right? If we did this from 2030 BC and we tried to count the spans of time and the years BC, it wouldn't add up, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what is it about 2510 BC Why does it do this? Have you thought about it? Because it's taking spans of time and it's lining them up with years. So why is it doing this?
I'm not seeing what you're.
Well, I'm just saying it just seems weird that it's 2510 BC that does this, not some other year. Like, if we went from the year of the flood and we counted the span of time, to, let's say, 1533 BC, we couldn't go back, we couldn't go to 1533 years and it would give us, from the flood, it would give us the date, right? So it only works with this 2510,
Mhm.
right? Not any other date. Correct? You agree with me there? That it's not just some little
Yeah.
trick.
Yeah, I haven't worked out, anything else, but I would presume that would be the case, yes.
Yeah. Because sometimes there's things like this that people run into, but they're just little mathematical tricks that you could use with any date.
Mhm.
But this isn't the case with this one. If anybody tries it out, you'll find it doesn't work. So that means
Okay.
it has to be of divine origin.
Mhm. Have you tried it out then with other dates?
Yeah.
Okay. So we also have a correlation here with what Aaron says and what Jeroboam says. And these here, you have quite similar language. These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. So just another just connection. And then we have a 777-year chiasm that would come about from having 1533 BC as the date of the Exodus. That you wouldn't have this if that was the case either. So we have the birth of Moses. He's 480 when the prophecy of Genesis 6 verse 3 comes into being, and then it's 120 years to the flood. And then we have 777 years to the birth of Moses, and then he dies after 120 years, and then we have that 480-year time period to the temple construction. Now, again, if that was if that period was going to the Exodus, that would be 80 years there. It would just, you wouldn't have that order, that matching up, I guess. And then the 600 is 120 times 5. And so we have all these like 480s, 120 times 4. And then the midpoint, I just noted that as well, is 2001 BC. I thought was a sort of worth noting. Not that I have an event there, but just as a connection to 2001 AD, as a but potentially just 9/11. So it's a midpoint in the structure. So not saying in particular, just just noting it. So I think that's the King's finish. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's probably not worthwhile going on to anything else.
No, we won't go on to the kings yet. Well, that's the kings. You did the United Kings, but not the divided kingdom.
Yes.
Yeah, so we would leave that for next time. Okay. So.
Yes.
Yeah, so thanks for doing that. It's definitely helpful for you to go through it than just to read the paper. Now, so we're going to add some things to this paper as time goes on. We're going to add some diagrams. And then we're going to have a bunch of issues dealing with the periods of the kings. that we have to. I don't think the period of the kings is going to be as easy, even though it's a shorter period of time, because there's a lot that happens and lots of little details. So I think it's worth it to go through the period of the kings in detail, and sort of hammer out some of those problems that arise, and there's lots of them. But the thing that I was amazed at is, after working out the period of the kings in the way that I did, which was really sort of the traditional way, I then recognized I could have simply, with a few little recognitions of some details, just added together the period of the kings and arrived at 391 years and a half. But there are some things about the chronology of the kings, that assumptions that people brought into it, that we're going to look at when we go through that. So, I mean, that's something I worked out in detail. So it'll be interesting going through it together.
Yeah, I could, if we just got a wee minute, just go back to the Abraham.
Okay.
Being in Haran, just my quotes we can look at. It's very short. Just looking for it here.
Okay, and so this is to cover just some more things that we had done before. You just wanted to clarify some points?
Yeah, so I mentioned there that I added Abraham leaving Ur when he's 70.
Mm-hmm.
So just the justification for that there. Well, I've mentioned Acts that mentions there. Okay, I don't have actually Acts statement, but it mentions that God called them out of Ur, the Chaldees. And it quotes from Genesis 12 when he's actually 75 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had studied that. Did you see that? Were you there in the morning study when we were talking about that?
Yes.
Okay.
But just Ellen White quotes concerning that. She says Abraham was 120 years old. This is when he's about to sacrifice Isaac, when the terrible and startling command came to him in the vision of the night. Okay, so, and then she says, in reference to this time when Abraham was commanded to slay Isaac, we are told, so that's me writing there. So as Abraham stepped out into the night, he seemed to hear the divine voice that called him out of Chaldea 50 years before. So I'm taking this is going to be Ur rather than Haran, because normally like it's Ur of the Chaldees. We don't really have, I don't think Haran is part of the Chaldees. So this would place Abram leaving Ur age 70. However, Ellen White would also place the covenant of Genesis 15 when Abram, well, I say there was 75, but he'd probably be later, and this is after, he'd be older than that, because he's 75 in chapter 12, and then in chapter 13, he separates from Lot, and then he has that battle in chapter 14 with the five kings, and then we have chapter 15. So I think you maybe mentioned during the week there that he would be in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking that he wouldn't maybe be as old as that. So let me say, maybe, I don't know, I'll just put a question mark there, but maybe between, certainly he's not as old as 86.
No, it can't be 86.
No, so to also being, so she says in Genesis 15, she relates to him also being 50 years before the command to slay Isaac. She says, Abraham rose before day,
Oh,
and as he looked up to the starry heavens, he called to mind the promise which God gave to him 50 years before. So that's the starry heavens, that's Genesis 15.
mm-hmm.
I take it, isn't that right? That's where I would think that she's referring to. Now,
That would
if
be,
he left her,
yeah.
yeah, so that would be, he left her when he was 70, Haran when he was 75.
Yeah.
So it's at least, she says 50 years, but it's going to be, it wouldn't be more than 45.
Yeah.
But I think you have an incident then with Lot
Mm-hmm.
in chapter 13 and then the armies. So I think it's going to be nearer 75 than it is going to be nearer 86. So I'm thinking it's going to be maybe about 77, 78, maybe about 3 years. So that means that 50 then would be like 43, 42 maybe years in actuality.
Okay. So when you're dealing,
And she,
yeah.
and she qualifies it in Patriarchs and Prophets. She talks about the same starry heavens, and she says nearly 50 years before.
Okay.
So it's not, she's saying it, so it's not going to be exactly 50.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's going to be maybe about 43 or so, 40. I'm like speculating again, but roughly it would be nearer that end rather than if he was in his 80s, it would be like 30 something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Not there in Genesis 15. I don't think he's going to be in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
That would be too far away from 50 years old as a approximate.
Okay. Yeah. Now, sometimes, and Ellen White's similar to us, for instance, when she talks, so sometimes she just sort of groups things together and gives a span of time, but doesn't make the distinctions that we're trying to make. And a really good example of this is when she talks about the years to the cross. She'll talk about things in the event of Christ's life connected with the cross. When she counts back, she actually counts just years BC. That is, she doesn't take into account the 30 some years since into the AD count. And I can show lots of illustrations of this. And she does the same thing when she's counting up from the time of Christ to her day, and she gives the number of years that it is. She again is not really counting. She's sort of rounding up to a larger number. So she does this sort of rounding, just kind of grouping things together, because if she was really particular, she would count from the years of Christ. So she'll talk about 1900 years since Christ, when really it's like 1840 years or 1850 years. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just because she's not using the same, if she's not using the actual event to count the date. She's using more just this kind of grouping it all together. So Christ is all the way from the time he's born, even though she's talking about events 30 some years later in his life. And she does this with other things. So that's why I have a bit of difficulty sometimes with some of these spans, using them, especially when, sometimes they're very rounded off, like 1500 years, etc. But I'm kind of cautious about just dismissing them unless there's other evidence or other statements that she uses that qualifies it. Right. So when she says nearly 50 years, well, yeah, that could be 45 years or less even. Right?
Yes.
You with me there? Okay. So these things sometimes cause people headaches, especially when you're very particular and you want to get things where Ellen White may not be giving us something as an exact measurement. It's just a rough approximation, because at the time she's writing, she's not trying to give us this exact measurement. An example of this has to do with the offering of the lamb, where she'll talk about the period of time as just being 1,500 years, when it's actually going to be 1533, starting with the Exodus, and then you're going to count the other 30 years. So you'd say it's like 1,560 years or so that she's talking about, but she's just going to call it 1,500 years. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So any other things? Any other questions people have for Stephen before we close with prayer?
One question, is that document that he's using something that he's updated? Because I'd noticed a couple of things that were out of place.
Yeah, it's updated, but we'll send it out once it's finished.
No, okay, all right.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
keep sending it out every time there's an update, because we got a lot of work to do on it. I'm going to add some diagrams to it once he can add them if he wants, diagrams that I have, however he wants to do it. And then we'll send it out when it's all done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So any questions for Stephen? I know our brains are probably all fried.
Been another long day.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, you want to close with prayer?
Do you want to close for me, please?
Okay. Dear Father in heaven, we are so very thankful for this Sabbath, the blessings of fellowship. And we're thankful for the things that you've been kind enough to show us from your word in the relation of the dates and the time spans in the Bible. And we ask, Lord, that we can continue to study these things, to understand them, and that we can apply them correctly. Be with each person now throughout the rest of the Sabbath and throughout this week. Be with us in this week coming up, in the studies that we are doing. And we ask for your angels to watch over us and to help us in our day-to-day struggles, that we may reflect your character. We pray for a blessing upon each person, a blessing upon Stephen and his study and his work. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.